Hi dears, Edith from Step Into Your Brilliance here. In this interview, you not only will discover a lot of personal information from the life of Joe Dispenza, it also contains a wonderful summary of the content of his highly successful work. This interview can literally change your life. So take some time and some writing, sit back and enjoy.
Dr. Joe, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know your agenda and your travel schedule is really, really tight and crazy.
I'm honored to be with you.
Thank you. I personally have witnessed the amazing results of what you have created. And however, I would like to understand your personal story. How do you got to where you are today?
Sure. As a child, I was always interested in human potential. I came from a family of Italian parents. My father was an immigrant from Italy, and they were simple and very loving, and I think they wanted the best for their children. So any interest that I had as a child, they promoted my interests. And so the story goes like this. I was studying medicine, pre-med, in college. And I was walking past the billboard and I saw a sign that said, "Learn while you sleep." And I don't know why that caught my attention, because I was taking 21 credits that semester, and it was a full load, and I was taking organic chemistry and a lot of the sciences. And I thought, wow, what a great idea.
Yes.
To learn while I'm sleeping. So it led me to this whole thing about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind and hypnosis, and I was intrigued by it, and I started reading everything I could about the power of the subconscious mind and hypnosis. And I went on to my further studies, and I got very interested in yoga and martial arts. By the time I graduated with my graduate degree, I studied so much martial arts. I had a black belt, and then I had a school. When I moved to San Diego, I taught yoga 3 or 4 days a week, and I never really planned on going in that direction, because it was just something new that caught my attention. But my interest was really about what is possible for human beings. And back then, in the 80s, it was just the only place you could find it was really studying yoga or martial arts or even hypnosis. And I was intrigued by stage hypnotists as well. So I studied hypnosis quite a bit. And then I was living in San Diego. I was training very, very hard for a triathlon, and on the biking portion of the race in this triathlon, I was making a turn, and there was a police officer on the corner, and he was waving me on, like pointing at me and waving me on, and there were two cyclists on the corner that were making the turn, and I was passing those cyclists, and when he was waving me on, he had his back to the oncoming traffic. So when I made the turn, this four-wheel drive vehicle was on the course, and it just hit me from behind and catapulted me out of my bike, and I landed on my back in a full somersault. And when you land that hard, the compression of those forces collapses the vertebrae. So I wound up breaking the 8th thoracic, 9th thoracic, 10th thoracic, 11th thoracic, 12th thoracic, and first lumbar vertebrae.
Wow.
And when you break, when you compress the volume of matter like that, the bone fragments have to go somewhere, so they go back against the spinal cord. And the neural arch, the little ring that the spinal cord passes through on the 8th thoracic vertebrae, had broken like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures of my thoracic spine. I had bone fragments on the cord, and I had the neural arch compressing the cord as well. Anyway, to keep the story brief, I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and they unanimously agreed that the only treatment that I could pursue at this point was what was called a Harrington rod surgery, which is where they cut off the back parts of your vertebrae. They take these long stainless steel rods and they screw them into your spine. And the act of screwing them into the spine actually pulls the spinal column off the spinal cord to relieve the pressure on the cord. And in my case, it would have been from the base of my neck to the base of my spine.
Wow.
So I was struggling at that point because surgery, that type of intervention, would have left me either addicted to some type of strong opiates, or I would have been in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, or limited in many ways, trying futilely to get away from the pain.
Mm-hmm.
So because of all of my interest in alternative ways, I wasn't so quick to just say, let's do the surgery. And it frustrated the surgeons quite a bit. And then the last day, I had to make a decision within 7 days, because after 7 days, the bones just start to automatically start to lay down strings of calcium.
Okay.
And the surgery would have been more radical if I changed my mind. So I decided against the surgery. And I thought, well, listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I'm laying face down with a lot of pain and some neurological challenges. And I thought, well, if there's an intelligence that's giving me life, that's keeping my heart beating and digesting my food, it certainly knows how to heal way better than me. There's an innate intelligence within us that gives us life. And that intelligence is a consciousness, as consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it's got to be paying attention to me. And I thought, well, hell, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. Maybe I should just make contact with it and give it a plan, give it a template, give it a design. And when I'm very pleased with the design that I wanted to give it, I will surrender it, my creation, to this greater mind and allow it to do the healing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I said is, I'm not going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Now, it sounds really easy, but when you're faced with crisis and trauma, I think we tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen, because the hormones of stress arouse the brain and body so that we're always preparing for the worst case scenario. So I would start reconstructing my spine, and then I'd start thinking about, oh my God, what if I live in a wheelchair? Should I sell my practice? And I caught myself not being able to pay attention. I'd stop and I'd start all over again. And it would take me hours to go through this whole process, and I would get frustrated and angry, and then it made it worse. and I was in a dark night of the soul because I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. But I didn't give up. Well, about 6 weeks into it, all of a sudden I went through the whole thing. It took me, up until that point, 3 hours to do this. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I went through the whole thing without breaking my attention. And it just felt like I hit a tennis ball right in the sweet spot. I just clicked. It just felt right. And from that point on, my body started to change. My pain level started to drop. I started to feel my feet again. And boy, the moment I noticed what I was doing inside of me was producing some result outside of me, now I was ambitious and I was enthusiastic, and I just looked forward to doing it. And I was back on my feet in 10 and a half weeks, and back living my life in about 12 weeks, back in my practice, training again. Now, the doctors told me that I would have to wear a body cast for 6 months to a year if I was ever able to walk again, because without the rods, the instability of the spine may have caused instant full paralysis. Mm-hmm. So I put the cast on for about 30 minutes, and I just said, there's no way I'm going to live with this thing. And I stepped back into my life. Now, right at that moment, I realized that I couldn't be the same person again. I mean, after you're initiated like that, I couldn't relate with the people in my life. What was I going to complain about? I mean, I had a new chance at life. I was so excited. And in those dark nights, and those sleepless nights as well, where I couldn't sleep because I wasn't doing anything, I made a deal with that intelligence, and I said, if I'm ever able to walk again, I'll spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter. That was 1986, and I've been at it since then. So I got back into my life and just decided that it was time for me to move, and I couldn't relate anymore. And so I asked bigger questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What happens when we die? What is the soul? And how did I heal? How did that happen? And I couldn't find any of the answers in any conventional journals or any textbooks. So it was antiquated. It was out of step for me. And so I sold everything, and I wanted to raise my kids in the country. I moved to the Pacific Northwest and had nice, beautiful gardens and horses, and I wanted them to live in nature. And I started asking those questions, and I couldn't find the answers in any other place but the new sciences, quantum physics, neuroscience. I mean, this concept called neuroplasticity, epigenetics, psychoneuroimmunology, all of those sciences really point the finger at possibility. Mm-hmm. And I started to construct this model that if mind and body are somehow related, or if mind has an effect on the nature of reality, you have to study mind in order to understand it. And how is it that we can begin to create changes in our outer world? Well, quantum physics is one of the new sciences that says that reality isn't really the way we perceive it, that we're perceiving momentary experiences in matter as particles, but there's an infinite field of information that's giving life to everything material. Mm-hmm. And when I was going within and reconstructing my spine, I was observing a possibility, an outcome. And when I started to emotionally embrace that state, my body, as the unconscious mind, began to believe it was living in that future reality in the present moment. Now, the latest sciences in genetics say that genes don't create disease. It's the environment that signals the gene that creates disease. Well, I started thinking, well, the end product of an experience in any environmental moment is an emotion. So when you start to embrace the emotion ahead of the experience, you begin to signal the gene ahead of the environment. And genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and the function of your physical body. And I started to realize that I was beginning to repattern the structure of my body, and I never have pain in my back. I'm not wired for it, and I don't have any limitations. And so I realized that in some way what we call miraculous really is something that we just haven't understood yet, and that maybe those spontaneous remissions that people experience aren't so spontaneous, but maybe there's an intent behind it. So now I sold my practice, I sold my homes, I went to the Northwest, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I started thinking about all these things, and so I decided that it was time for me to study spontaneous remissions. So I traveled to 17 different countries. I interviewed hundreds of people that were treating conventionally or unconventionally, and they were staying the same or getting worse, and all of a sudden they got better. So I wanted to know what the cause was that was producing that effect. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't their diet. It wasn't that they were celibate. It wasn't that they were a Christian or Jewish or Buddhist. It wasn't that they didn't drink alcohol. I mean, some of them smoked. There was no correlation.
A clear pattern
that I could begin to correlate. And, when something happens once, that's an incident. When you start seeing two events that happen in a very short amount of time, that's called a coincidence. But when you start seeing 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, now you're looking at a trend, and anything that's repeatable is science. So after hundreds of interviews, I began to realize that they had 4 common things.
Okay.
The first thing was that they all believed that there was an intelligence within them that was giving them life. And they all understood that they couldn't do the healing, that some greater mind had to step in and do it, just like me. And this intelligence is a function of the autonomic nervous system. And autonomic nervous system means automatic. It's what's giving us life right now. And they had to begin to make some type of internal changes to begin to program their autonomic nervous system. And I was passionate about demystifying that process. The second thing they had in common is that they realized that it was their own thoughts and feelings, their own emotions, their own choices and behaviors that created their disease. It wasn't their ex-husband, it wasn't their parents, it wasn't their boss, or they're getting fired from their job or betrayed by their best friend. The event may have created some strong memory and emotion, but they realized that they lived by those emotions and by those thoughts, and that they had to change. And they had to literally break the habit of being themselves. Mm-hmm. And that was a very important element, because positive thinking, it doesn't work, because most people who are trying to think positive feel really negative. and that 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions, beliefs and perceptions, and unconscious or hardwired attitudes that are happening behind the scenes of our awareness. So the first step then is becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, noticing your automatic behaviors and habits, and paying attention to those emotions that you live by every single day to such a degree that you're no longer the program, that you're the consciousness observing the program, and beginning to objectify your subjective self. So these people had to go through this kind of uncluttering or unconnecting from themselves, and allowing the old self in a certain way to die.
Okay.
And then the third thing was, they started to think about, who am I going to be when I return back to my life? And now this is an important question. And the moment you ask that frontal lobe question, or that creative question, you turn on the creative center in the brain, which is the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe's got to answer the question. So people started to think about who they wanted to be. And this opens the door to the mind-body connection, because the latest research in neuroplasticity tells us we're not hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of our lives. The latest research in epigenetics says we're not doomed by our genes, that in fact we're marvels of adaptability and change. So as a person started to contemplate and think about, who do I want to be when I open my eyes? What would it be like to be happy? What would it be like to live a new life? The frontal lobe is looking out into the landscape of the entire brain, because it has connections to the entire neocortex, and it's got to resolve the problem. So it starts calling up different networks of neurons that are relevant to the question based on the knowledge the person learns, or the experiences that they had, and it begins to seamlessly piece together this new understanding, and that's called intention. And so if you're reading a book about how to become more happy, or if you're reading a book on how to be a leader in your life, or you're studying the process, every time you learn something new, you add new connections to your brain. So now you have the raw materials for you to imagine even more. So the act of mentally rehearsing begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like it's already happened. Now, the brain is typically a record of the past, but the moment we install the neurological hardware, it becomes a map to the future. And you keep doing that, the hardware becomes a software program, which means you start thinking like a genius. You start acting like a happy person, because there's no mystery there, because you installed the circuits. And then these people didn't wait for their wealth or their health to feel gratitude and to feel empowered or to feel love, a love for life. They began to feel those emotions ahead of the experience. And their body, as the unconscious mind, doesn't know the difference between the experience in their life that creates the emotion and the emotion that they're creating by thought alone. The body's believing it's living in the future, in the present moment. And the stronger the emotion that they felt, the more they're going to pay attention to the thoughts they're thinking. And now all of a sudden, they're changing their biology from living in the past present reality to living in the future present reality. And I was so intrigued by this process that I went back to school to study neuroscience, because it was the answer. So then the last thing they had in common, which I thought was so amazing, is that in the internal process of rehearsing and imagining, they had long moments where they lost track of time and space, where when they opened their eyes, they thought it was maybe 15, 20 minutes later, and it was an hour and 15 minutes later. And when we get into the present moment, Umberto, there's a moment where you lose track of yourself. You forget about yourself. And only in the present moment do you have access, according to the quantum model of reality, to other possibilities. And when you're truly in the present moment, the generous present moment, That's the moment then that you are no longer living in the familiar past or the predictable future. And in order for us to change, I realized that we have to get beyond our environment. And what's our environment made of? People, husbands, kids, bosses, objects, things, places. You got to get beyond your emotions, your body, your pain, your disease. And you got to get beyond this concept of linear time. Mm-hmm. So when we get beyond our body, our environment, and time, we become pure consciousness. And now that consciousness can begin to connect to the consciousness of the field. And all of a sudden I realized that when people are nobody, no one, no thing, no where, and no time, that's the moment. They're no longer a face, they're no longer a culture, they're no longer a skin color, they're no longer a mother, they're no longer a grandmother, no longer a doctor or an attorney, they're no longer a nurse, they're pure consciousness. And that is the element that we begin to connect to something greater. So I wrote a book about it, and then I wound up on this documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? And that became an overnight sensation. And we did all these conferences, all the scientists all over the world. And at the end of every conference, we had panel discussions. And I started listening to the people's questions during those panel discussions. And they asked really 3 important questions. How do we do it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is a good question. How do our thoughts affect our body or our life? Second question, if our personality creates our personal reality, and it does, and our personality is made up of how we think, how we act, and how we feel. In order for me to change my personal reality, I have to change my personality. Why the hell is it so hard to change? And I thought that was a really good question. Mm-hmm. And the third thing was, what do you do? So I started teaching these Friday night, all day Saturday events and giving people the understanding of brain science and brain waves and the quantum model, and showing them pictures of neurons connecting and disconnecting, what neural nets are and how the brain works and what focus concentration looks like, and begin to create something where people could really begin to practice at home. And basically I said, okay, well, if these are the 4 principles that these people used in my first book to heal based on my investigation, it should work for sick people or normal people. The process is exactly the same. We got to unlearn and relearn. Mm-hmm. We got to break the habit of the old self, reinvent a new self. Mm-hmm. We got to unfire and unwire and refire and rewire. We have to prune synaptic connections and sprout new connections. Unmemorize emotions stored in the body, and then we have to recondition the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, to stop signaling the same genes in the same way and begin to signal new genes in new ways, to pull our attention and our energy out of the familiar past and begin to invest our attention and energy into a new future, to go from the known to the unknown. So the model was built, and we started doing these workshops all over the world, from Australia to Mexico to Colombia to Canada to the United States to South Africa to all over Europe. We were teaching these events, and to be honest with you, the first year I didn't see many changes. We saw some people be happier, a greater sense of well-being.
Okay.
But no real breakthroughs. But at the end of these introductory level courses, people would ask, can you teach another level? So then I taught a level 2, and then at the end of that, they said, could you teach another level? Then we taught a level 3, and then they said, can you teach another level? And I said, I don't know anything else. I ran out. But right around that point, I started having some really profound mystical experiences. Those mystical moments were so profound that I couldn't go back to be Joe Dispenza again. And all of a sudden, I realized that every time I had one of those mystical moments, the first thing that I came to when I came back to who I was I have this all wrong. Like some layer of conditioning, how we're so unconscious to how we view the world. Some layer, some veil was lifted. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, I got very passionate about the mystical. And so we started teaching a level 3.5. And then right around this time, all of a sudden, people started sending the emails in. My God, I was diagnosed with this condition. I was trying to get this job, and I changed my energy, and I changed this, and I started doing the work, and my body's healthy. Here's the blood tests, here's the scans. And all of a sudden, we started seeing that it started to catch on. And so I wrote my second book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself,
which was a great success.
It was a great success, and there was a great meditation in there and a how-to. And I watched many people right around this point, start to make really profound changes in their health right during our events. So we went from a level 3.5 to a level 3.5 pi, and then we did a level 3.5 pi a la mode, and we started seeing spontaneous remissions right in our events. And all of a sudden, I knew that I had to change everything. So then I gathered a team of scientists and researchers and said, what is going on here? People are literally getting out of wheelchairs, and people are sending us, blood work and MRIs and scans saying my tumor's gone. What's going on? I knew that it was happening in real time, so I gathered a team of researchers and scientists, and we started measuring. We started measuring brain waves. We've done over 8,000 quantitative scans on the brain.
Wow.
We would measure people that came into our event. We started doing 4.5-day, 5 days events so that we could have people for a substantial amount of time measure their brain before they came. At the end of 4 or 5 days, measure their brain at the end. And I would say, I want to know the changes are not just in their mind,
yes,
but they're in their brain. And all of a sudden, we realized that we had, in our first 2 advanced workshops, these 4 and 5 day events, when we started studying the brain scans, 91% of the people that came had a more than 80% change in their brain for the better. So we knew that we were doing something really right. And then we started randomly selecting different people, and we started studying their brains when they were going through the process of internal change. Mm-hmm. In other words, in real time, I wanted to know what those elements were that allowed the person to connect. And boy, we learned so much about how to change. I can tell you that the personality doesn't change the personality. I can tell you the ego doesn't change the ego. I can tell you that matter takes a long time to change matter, that the brain takes a long time to change the brain. Only when you become pure consciousness, that consciousness is the phenomena above the brain and matter. And we started realizing that when people are stressed out or they're emotional, and they start analyzing themselves and their lives within some disturbing emotion, they make their brain worse every time, not just once, or every time.
Okay.
So then all of a sudden I realized I'd have to get better at teaching. So we did over 5,000 HRV monitors, scans on the heart, because when you're stressed out and when you're impatient and when you're frustrated, the heart beats out of rhythm because it believes that there's a predator behind the corner here, or you're worried about the next thing that's going to happen. You're switching on the survival centers. And so it takes a clear intention and elevated emotion to begin to affect matter and the nature of reality. So you got to open your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to teach our students how to make that a skill. And we could measure them when they do it. And when you feel gratitude and appreciation and love and kindness and care, your heart starts beating in rhythm. It starts beating in a coherent pattern. When you start getting beyond matter and bodies and people and things, and you take your attention and you open your awareness to space, to nothing, the brain gets super coherent. We've measured it thousands of times. And so we just got better at teaching the process, and our students can create brain coherence and change their brain waves in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 9 seconds, 12 seconds, 15 seconds. They just know, it's a skill. They know how to do it. And when I say go into heart coherence, they know how to do that. They can do it for 45 minutes. And why is it important? Because so many times in our life we go unconscious and we disconnect. And when the heart is beating coherently, it produces a measurable magnetic field that can be up to 3 meters wide. That's a magnetic field that allows you to begin to spread your energy. Mm-hmm. And that energy is a frequency, and frequency carries information. And now that energy can carry the thought of your abundance. It carry the thought of your wealth, because all thoughts have a frequency. You can't, the emotion of guilt, the energy of suffering cannot carry the thought of abundance or health, because it's not the same energy. And just like you could say, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy with your conscious mind, and if your body's been emotionally conditioned into unhappiness or pain, that thought never makes it to your body, and there's no connection between the mind and body. So when people elevate their emotional states, like in a state of gratitude, the emotional signature of gratitude means the event has already happened. It means when you give thanks, you're getting something. So when you start giving thanks, your body's in a perfect state of receiving. So we want people to change their energy and to create this heart coherence, and we want to measure them. We want to know that we can say to them, you're doing it or you're not doing it. So we measured the energy of the room because we started seeing people saying, wow, the energy is incredible. And so many of our events in the 19 different advanced workshops we did in the last 5 years, the energy in the room has always gone up. We measured the energy around people's bodies. If you're freeing your body from the chains of those emotions that keep you anchored from the past, you should go from particle to wave, from matter to energy, liberating energy and freeing your body. So we measure the energy centers of the body because we teach our students that each one of these energy centers are centers of information. They have their own frequency, they have their own intent, they have their own consciousness, they have their own glands, their own hormones, their own chemicals, their own individual little brains, and they're under the control of the autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So people have to learn how to change their brain waves to get into their autonomic nervous system to begin to reprogram these different energy centers. And I thought, well, people are healing, but let's find the instruments to show us that those changes are actually scientifically based. So we found an instrument in Russia, and we measured thousands of people's energy. We also have done measurements on immune regulation, and we found that just a few times a day, 10 minutes a day for 4 days, just elevating your emotional state will strengthen your immune system by more than 50%. We have the science to prove it. And we've measured genetic changes. We've measured 7,500 different gene regulations, and our students have changed their genetic expression in 4 days. Genes that downregulate tumors and cancer growth, genes that are responsible for neurogenesis, not just making new connections, but the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning. The gene that stimulates or downregulates oxidative stress and begins to cause the body to move back into balance, anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative. The gene that activates stem cells to go to damaged tissues and repair them. The gene that activates microtubules. The microtubules are the skeletal structures of the cell that vibrate and emit light, coherent light and information. And when cells are diseased or out of balance, those different harmonics are causing the cells to emit different frequencies, and the frequencies can't carry the information, and that's what causes the cells to begin to break down. Well, we now know that the microtubules, the gene when the microtubule gets signaled, that they're resonating at a greater frequency. And so our most recent research was measuring telomere lengths. And telomeres are the little DNA shoestrings that every time a cell divides, it gives up a little of that shoestring. And so the body begins to biologically age. So my question was, could we reverse that? And so we randomly selected 32 people. We asked them to do meditations for 5 to 7 days for 60 days. And 74% of those people had a change for the better in their telomere length. We had 40% have a significant change, and we had 23% have a dramatic change. In other words, they got a certain percentage of their life back. The telomeres were actually lengthening. And one lady, we measured the telomeres at the beginning of the event. 4 days later, we measured the telomeres, and we measured the telomeres 60 days later. The scientist said to me, you're not going to see any changes in telomeres 4 days later, because telomeres, as I understand, it's like hair or fingernails. They take time to grow. But I said to the scientist, well, we're witnessing people get their hearing back in one meditation.
Really?
Not once, not twice, not 3 times. We have people with skin rashes come out of a meditation and the skin rash is gone. And they're getting a biological upgrade. So I said, well, if it's happening in no time, it's not a Newtonian phenomenon. It's not matter changing matter. Like, we're talking about energy changing matter, which is a quantum phenomenon. And I said, if that's happening, is it possible that their telomeres could lengthen in a very short amount of time? And he paused for a long time, and then he said, I think it is possible. I said, well, I'm willing to spend the money to see if it's true. And we had one lady lengthen her telomeres in 4 days. which is really, really significant.
Wow.
So anyway, I gathered all this data, and I wrote a book called You Are the Placebo, Making Your Mind Matter. And I had thought, well, hell, if you understand the science of the placebo, giving someone a sugar pill or a saline injection or performing some false surgery or procedure, a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that they're getting the real substance or treatment, and they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make the exact pharmacy of chemicals equal to the substance they think they're taking. Now, that's not light dinner conversation. That means then that pill, which is an inert substance, is a symbol that represents a possibility in the quantum field. And they begin to think about that possibility called getting well. And a certain percentage of those people will begin to feel optimistic, enthusiastic, excited, inspired, and they're combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion. And they're beginning to reprogram their autonomic nervous system. I mean, think about it. Over 80% of people that are in a depression study, brain scans before and after, 80% of those people have a significant change equal to people that are actually given the real substance, the people that are given the placebo. That means 4 out of 5 people are responding to the placebo, just like an antidepressant. The brain scans at the end of 60 days show a dramatic change in their brain. That means they're making their own pharmacy of antidepressants by thought alone.
Yes.
So I thought, well, once I understand the dynamics, the science of the placebo, can I teach it? Well, it turns out that our students are able to do it because you don't need the sugar pill or the saline injection to combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion. Instead of selecting a known like a pill, select an unknown in the quantum field and keep revisiting it until you biologically make it known. And do it over and over again until you begin to program the gene to begin to express itself. And so I wrote a book called You Are the Placebo. I showed some of the science in there. And then somewhere along the line, we started seeing profoundly different brain scans. I mean, neuroscientists that were coming and studying us during these moments were concerned that our students were having seizures because the amount of energy in their brain was and is dramatic. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of times more energy than we typically see in a normal person. And so
they were probably thinking, like, we should take these people to the ER.
Yeah, no. And I have had our brain scientists yell seizure during an event because the person who was getting scanned was a physician from London who connected to that field of information, and her body moved into a state of grace and love that she had never felt in her entire life, and her brain popped.
Exploded.
And they were saying, seizure, seizure. And she was thinking, if this is a seizure, I want more of this. Now, the amount of energy in high gamma brainwave patterns was 200 standard deviations outside of normal. That is off the chart. And she had severe eczema since she was 3 months old. She took all the cortisone creams, she did the antihistamines, she didn't drink alcohol, she ate all the non-gluten foods, stayed away from sugar, matter to matter.
Yes.
Never really changed it. One moment, and those microtubules vibrated, and she felt that love in every cell of her body. They sent me the picture of her arm on Monday morning after the event. No eczema. Her hands completely clear. I just saw her. She has no sign of that condition any longer. She got a biological upgrade. So then we started seeing these profound amounts of energy in the brain, this brainwave pattern called gamma. The gamma brainwaves are super arousal. Like you go into high beta when there's a predator around the corner, or you jam on the brakes and almost hit somebody. Your brain gets aroused from some stressor in your outer environment. Mm-hmm. But when the brain goes into coherent, gamma brainwave patterns, and the entire global structure of the brain is in gamma. There's super coherence in there. The nervous system is ignited, and they're connecting to that quantum field. Greater and greater degrees of wholeness and order, greater degrees of oneness is starting to be embraced, and the arousal that's created is not coming from the outer world. It's coming from the inner world. And the stronger the arousal emotionally, the more they pay attention to the imagery in their brain. And all of a sudden, I had to start studying the latent systems in the brain that begin to create the mystical experience. The pineal gland in the back of the brain gets a biological upgrade and begins to release metabolites, derivatives, that are upgraded versions of melatonin that cause us to become lucid, that causes us to create the same chemical that Valium is made of. We relax. We produce really powerful antioxidants. We have the same chemical found in hibernating animals. The body loses all its drives, sex drive, appetite, preoccupation with the outer world. The same chemical found in an electric eel. Imagine the nervous system gets a very high amplitude. Dimethyltryptamine, the same chemical found in plant medicine that causes hallucinations. But the pineal gland begins to release all these metabolites, and the person has a full-on sensory experience without their senses. Now think about this. What would happen right now if your senses were heightened by 30%? Everything you were seeing, everything you were hearing, everything you were smelling, everything you were tasting, everything you were feeling. If your senses were heightened right now by 30%, your awareness of everything around you would be heightened. Mm-hmm. Well, awareness is consciousness. And if you're having a greater level of consciousness, then you can't have consciousness without energy. So all of a sudden, these people are having profoundly mystical experiences that are more real than where we're sitting right now. And then if experience enriches the brain, and it does, and experience produces emotions, and it does, the person is having that full-on experience that's inward, that's more real than the betrayal or the trauma than their past. There's an immediate reorganization of the neural architecture. There's a whole new emotional signal that's turning on new genes and turning off old genes. And you could say that in one instant, the past is washed away. And the person comes back to their senses and they say, I don't need my hearing aid. I can hear. The person says, I don't know what that was, but I have no pain in my body. I don't know what that was, but I couldn't feel my feet. But now I can walk and I can feel my feet. My peripheral neuropathy has gone away. And now what's happening is it's happening in a shorter and shorter amount of time. And we run these week-long events now because after 19 advanced workshops, watching this happen and witnessing all the amazing supernatural changes, I wrote another book called Becoming Supernatural. How common people are doing the uncommon. And it's really based on everything I talked about and the mystical, because you only need one of those mystical experiences and you can't go back to being the same person again. You know too much. And so hormones of stress, I think, arouse the brain and body to create separation. The very chemicals cause us to narrow our focus on the material world. We become materialists and we define reality with our senses because the very chemicals of stress are what cause us to become addicted to certain emotions. And then we start using the problems and conditions in our life to reaffirm our addiction to anger or frustration or impatience or guilt or betrayal. And so people start needing the problems in their life. And the arousal of those chemicals then narrows our focus on matter. And we focus on the particle in quantum physics, and we take away possibility. And so we started to realize that when people go from a narrow focus to an open focus, and when they begin to pay attention to that field, they stay present with it, they experience it, they become more aware of it. Mm-hmm. Moment by moment by moment, there'll come a moment where all of a sudden they'll begin to connect to it. Now, the hormones of stress create separation. There's me here and there's you there, and there's space and distance between us. And then there's me here, and then there's my future and my dreams way over there. Mm-hmm. And I got to drag my body through space to get to my dreams, and it's going to take time. And that's the world of Newtonian physics. And the more separation we have between 2 points of consciousness, the more distance we have between 2 points of consciousness, the more time it's going to take for me to get there. If I'm in Mexico City and I say I want to get to Dallas and I'm going to walk, well, I'm going to drag my body through space and it's going to take me a long time to get there. 1 point of consciousness, Mexico City, the other point of consciousness, Dallas. My body moves through space, it takes time. Well, in the quantum, it's kind of opposite, because in this three-dimensional world, there's an infinite amount of space. Space is the commodity, and we experience time moving through space. But in the quantum, there's an infinite amount of time. Time is eternal. And if time is eternal in that realm, imagine if you had all the time in the world. You can get anything done you wanted to, right?
Yes.
It's only equal to your imagination. And so then, as you as a consciousness, as you go from a somebody to a nobody, as someone to no one, from something to nothing, from somewhere to nowhere, from sometime to no time, and you become pure consciousness, as our students begin to connect to that field, and they begin to pay attention to it and surrender to it and stay present with it and go deeper into it, their consciousness is moving closer to the consciousness of the unified field. And as you begin to move closer and closer to it, the signature of the unified field is oneness and wholeness, which means you experience less separation and you experience more wholeness. And if you feel more whole, you feel like you already have everything you want. And so you're no longer creating from duality or polarity or lack. And as you get closer and closer to that unified field, there's less separation between 2 points of consciousness, then there's less time, which means it starts happening in a shorter amount of time. So we started doing these week-long events because I realized, boy, after 4 days, people are connecting and having these amazing experiences. What would happen if we had them for a week? And that's what we're starting to see now, instantaneous, miraculous changes. And that's where we're at.
Thank you for sharing this. It's amazing. Doctor, why, or it seems from the way you relay the story that like week-long events and 3 or 4 day events are more powerful than, let's say, 3 or 4 months of meditation 1 hour a day. Is that the case?
Well, here's what I believe. I believe in this concept called information, the transformation. I now know, without a doubt, Humberto,
yes,
if you give people sound scientific information, and science is the contemporary language of mysticism.
Correct.
It is.
Correct.
Science demystifies the mystical. And you combine a little quantum physics with a little neuroscience, a little neuroendocrinology, a little psychoneuroimmunology, a little epigenetics, a little brainwave technology. And people, as they're embracing that information, and it's current. Now, it's not enough to just listen to it, because you learn it, you make new connections in your brain. But then we ask our students to turn to the person next to them and explain it. If you can't explain it, it's not wired in your brain. So then they begin to build a model of understanding, firing and wiring, firing and wiring. And as they begin to make their brain fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, they're changing their mind. Mind is the brain in action. So if we keep reminding them of these models and they can explain it, they're installing the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for the experience. And the more they understand what they're doing and why, the how gets easier. So then, if I can set up the conditions in the environment immediately right afterwards, and nothing's left to conjecture, nothing's left to superstition, nothing's left to dogma.
Yes.
You understand exactly what you're doing and why. And you give the people the proper instruction and they feel safe enough to do it. And I have 750 people or 1,000 people or 1,500 people, a community of people all doing it at the same time. A certain percentage of those people are going to get their behaviors to match their intentions and their actions equal to their thoughts. And when they do, they're going to have some type of transformation, a change in form. Well, if I could measure their transformation like we did, then I have more information to teach transformation the next time. And if I can measure that transformation, I have more information to teach transformation the next time. So all of a sudden you start closing the gap between knowledge and experience. So there's a momentum when you get a community of people together. And they're not busy on their cell phones or their computers or taking care of their kids. They are focused, and they're focused on creating a new future. And after looking at 8,000 some odd brain scans, I can tell you that you are at your absolute best when you get beyond yourself, period. That is a fact. So you get all of a sudden now people starting to break through. And we start at 6 in the morning, and we go to 6 in the evening or 7 in the evening. Nobody complains. It's fun. And some days we're up at 4 in the morning because that is when the brain chemistry is right for the mystical. And people show up because they want the mystical more than their sleep.
Yes.
So if we get a community of people doing this, and the first day, it's a little bit of a challenge to break past your emotions and your frustration and your habits and all the voices in your head. But if you keep going, all of a sudden, there's a momentum. And people just start letting go. And so in 4 days, well, Saturday or Sunday, the energy of the room was off the chart. People were standing up that had all kinds of amazing healings. And I thought, what if we had 3 more days of this? We could move mountains. And so I stopped doing the 4-day advance, stopped doing the measurements because we have tons of data, although we do some measurements here and there, and do the week-longs. And let's just go. And so now in the week-long events, after looking at all the data, I know that you can create heart coherence and brain coherence because I've seen your scan. So then I say, okay, let's do something really supernatural. Let's put people in conditions in the environment that would normally evoke fear, anxiety, normally would evoke exhaustion or some type of limited state. And in that moment, have them begin to, with their eyes open, create heart coherence and brain coherence and begin to make that change. And all of a sudden, people are in these new week-longs, they're breaking through, because if you're standing on a pole that's, let's see, 15 meters, 13 meters in the air.
Really tall, really high.
And you are, strapped in, but you're standing on that pole and there's a trapeze behind you, or you're walking across a plank, and that other side is your future, and your legs are shaking and your heart is racing, you only got one of 2 choices. Either you're going to stop with your eyes open, work on creating coherence again, settling down and moving across. And we had people with MS, with lupus, we had people with Parkinson's disease walking across those planks. And let me tell you something. They got off those planks and they were not the same person.
So just to be clear, you're speaking about physical situations.
Yeah.
Not mental situations.
No. We've done that, and we've got a lot of people that can do it, but we have people in their 70s up there, up. I'm afraid of heights, they say. Well, yeah, we know that. And so the model is not so much accomplishment, because that becomes a trap as well. The model is taking people further than where they normally go. Because what happens with most people is that I believe that you learn the most about yourself and you learn the most about others when they're outside their comfort zone.
True.
Or when we're outside our comfort zone. So then all of this is like to get people to the point where they believe in themselves. And when you believe in yourself, you believe in possibility. And when you take a person who says, I don't think I can do that, and you say, well, why don't you just climb up and see how you do? And then they climb up, and then you say, why don't you just get up there? And, it's all safe, and it's, there's a ton of support.
But if you're afraid of heights, it freaks you out.
Right, but if you go further than where you normally go, there's a release of energy.
Yes.
And that release of energy is free energy. That's available energy for you to create a new future. That's available energy to heal. So in these week-longs, we've had 2 so far. I'll show you some of the videos when we break here, and it's really powerful, really powerful. And to challenge people to that measure and to get them to believe in themselves, there's no greater drug.
Yeah.
There's just no greater feeling. And then imagine, you're up there and it's not competitive. Everybody is down there cheering you on and loving you.
Yeah, you're right.
You can do this. And, we have people in their 80s, do that. And then when it comes to the walking meditation, they heal their body in 1 hour, walking as their future self. I mean, it's just outstanding. So I'm super excited about it because I've stopped doing my progressive workshops. I've stopped doing the intensive workshops. I don't do keynotes very often unless I owe somebody a favor. I don't do conferences that much. My passion is to be with doers.
Like
I'm a
real
doer.
transformation.
Real transformation. Evidence. I mean, this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And I'm so proud to say that the community of people that we have around the world, they do the work. They just do the work. They just wake up in the morning and they change their brain and body, and they get their heart open, and they get in that state, and they expect the uncommon and the miraculous and the unknown to show up in their life, because why else are we doing this? You know, people think they want health, or they want wealth, or they want a new relationship, or they want love. It's not that. It's who you become in the process. Because every person that had a spontaneous remission, and I've interviewed so many of them in our work, they'll tell you that my disease was my greatest teacher. They'll tell you it wasn't my mother, it wasn't my father who was abusive, it wasn't my uncle, who was abusive. It's just who I became in the process. You can't take that away from a person, because it's not the wealth. It's you become the very thing. And so people are starting to wrap their mind around these concepts. And when you start understanding that, the only thing you want is the unknown. In stress, you run from the unknown. When your heart is open, you crave it. It's an adventure. And so people are evolving because of it, and they're doing the work. And we have the evidence to show that common people around the world are doing the uncommon.
I've personally experienced some of the things that you just shared with the audience, and I can attest for it to be true. Well, I want to relay a really short story. In one of your, I think it was a 4-day event in Cancun, I still wasn't a full believer, and there was this guy who was just like dancing, but like in a very intense way. And after 24 hours, or I think it was the second day, he kept dancing and dancing and dancing, and I started to feel angry. I was like, what's up with that guy? So I walked up to someone that was right next to him, and I was like, what's going on with this guy? And they were like, oh, his name is X, Y, and Z. He was paraplegic, and he was told he was never going to walk again. So when he started doing the meditations and he was able to walk again, he decided that he was going to enjoy it, like, from then on, dancing and walking. And I was like, oh my God, I was ashamed of my anger. I started believing.
Sure. The funny thing about that is, in our last advanced week-long, we had 3 people step out of their wheelchairs. It's becoming the new normal. And again, when you see somebody, and this is the power of numbers, and there's nothing like a story.
Yes.
You have witnessed people stand up with a diagnosis of breast cancer, of colon cancer, a diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy, a diagnosis of esophageal cancer. You watch them stand on the stage and tell their story of their own personal healing, and they don't look like a movie star or a sports figure. They're not all young, they're not all buffed, they're not all wealthy, and something happens that's innate in us. You watch that, and it's not like all glamorous. They had a lot of struggles, they had a lot of challenges, they lost their people in their life, they got really sick, and they kept going. And you hear how they did the work in spite of fear, self-doubt. You hear that they did the work in spite of feeling so sick that they couldn't do it, or there wasn't enough time. They never missed a day. And they stand up there and they say, I had no reason to be in love with life, but every day I wouldn't get up from my meditation until I was in love with life. And the disease is gone, and I have a great life right now. I'm in love with my life. And you watch that person tell the story. They're speaking to you about possibility. And you can't sit down and do the work and deny that it's the truth any longer. You now know it's the truth.
Yes.
And it's no longer like, this isn't really, for me, it doesn't really work. It's really like, what is it about me that's not making my way? What is it? What is the emotion? What is the unconscious belief? What is the program? And so just like an infection spreads amongst the community and creates disease, I believe that health and wellness are as infectious as disease. And when you get a community of people together and they start popping, and that happens. The last 2 week longs, I called my staff on the stage to witness what I was witnessing. They were in tears. When you witness that and you see what's possible, you begin to realize that we've all been hypnotized. All of this is to convince us that we're limited human beings, that we need something outside of us to make us feel better inside of us. And man, when you start grabbing onto this concept, that when the moment you start feeling no reason, and you're doing it from inside of you, and you start seeing the effects outside of you, you'll believe you're more of the creator of your life than less of a victim in your life. Because you say to a person, why are you so sad? Why are you so unhappy? They'll say, I'm unhappy because of my ex-husband. I'm unhappy because of the job. And what you're basically saying is that your outer environment is controlling how you think and feel, which means you're a victim.
Yes.
To your outer environment. But when you're regulating internal states independent of the conditions in your external environment, and your environment starts to shift and change, then you're going to realize that, oh my God, I'm never going to react to that person again, because the moment I do, I just return back to my past. And all of a sudden, people start getting it, and they start spiraling out of their lives into new lives. And it's happening more and more, and it's happening in a shorter amount of time because people are feeling more connected.
That's amazing. Doctor, what do you see happening in the future?
I'm so humbled, I think, at this point in my life, in witnessing what I witnessed in our last advanced week-long. I have a certain vision of where I'd like a community of people to go, that can heal one another, that can instantaneously create outcomes in their life, that have access to mystical experiences and dimensions. I believe that the biggest lie we've ever been told is that we're linear beings living a linear life. I know that we're dimensional beings living a dimensional life, and I think that this is an amazing time in history right now. I think we all signed up to be here at this particular moment. All the paradigms are breaking down. You know, the economies, the political structures, the religious structure, the educational structure, journalism, the environment, the medical model. All these things are collapsing because something greater has to come. And I believe that it's not one person. It's everybody, and I believe that if you get a group of people that are heart-centered, and we've done the research to show that in a room of 750 people, all going into an elevated state, opening their hearts, and having 40 people in the front of the room wearing heart rate monitors, and those people are sending the intent that the people in the front of the room, their lives be enriched, that their bodies be healed, that the mystical find them, that their dreams come true, that all of these people go into heart coherence at the exact same time, the exact same day, the exact same meditation. You see, we're connected by this invisible field called love, and I think that if you get enough people beginning to do that, and there's a morphic field that people can draw from, that 4-minute mile, that people are waking up because information is so readily available, that all of a sudden I think the old paradigms are going to collapse, and we should never be afraid of the collapse of those paradigms, and we should not face them in fear or hostility or prejudice. That's what's created them in the first place.
Yes.
But when people really come together, I think our innate nature is to care for one another, and to love one another, and to be kind to one another. And so much of the world reminds us to not do that. So I think it's a great time to be alive. I hope in some measure, in some way, that I'm making a difference and contributing to the world. But I think a new consciousness is what I'm after. We've done 4 global meditations. We've had over 45,000 people participate in one. So people are waking up to the idea the world can change. But it's not enough to just focus on peace. you got to be peace. You can't say I believe in peace and be arguing with your coworker. You got to take care of that. And so I think that if everybody is looking within, if everybody is really saying, well, I don't like that person, or I don't like these conditions, does that exist in me at all? I think if everybody's doing that, it's not about the person out there that's doing what they're doing. It's about principles. And principles are not based in polarity. If you're left or you're right, or if you're male or female or gay or straight or vegetarian or carnivore, it's all based on polarity. But principles is what unifies people. And so I'm very optimistic about the future, because I'm optimistic that there's goodness in human beings when they finally get beyond their past.
That sounds amazing. Doctor, in one of your seminars that I went to, you mentioned, I don't remember the exact words, but you were talking about objects like holy water and just like objects that people give them their power. And you mentioned something like there's nothing outside of you that has power over you.
Well, I think this is an interesting belief for a lot of people, and a lot of cultures believe that they get a hex on them, and that or a curse on them, and that their life is ruined. But really, they're only suggestible to information equal to their emotional states. Mm-hmm. So if you're into crystals and you're giving your power away to a crystal, it's not the crystal that's healing you. It's your thought that the crystal's going to heal you. Well, there may be some energetic effects, but really, in truth, that I think so many people place their power outside of them. And when we come preloaded with all the machinery biologically to do this. Yes. And you witness in our events people who are doing it, and your jaw drops and you say, wow, if that person did that without any help, mm-hmm. then it must mean that I need less assistance from my outer world. So people, they could only accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts that are equal to their emotional state. Mm-hmm. And they will never accept, believe, and surrender to any thoughts that are not equal to their emotional state. So many people give their power away to a planet that's 93 million miles away, and they say, the reason I have anxiety is because Mercury's in retrograde. Well, no, the reason you have anxiety is because you created anxiety because you kept selecting the worst case scenario in your future and emotionally embracing it and conditioning your body into the mind of fear. And the planet has nothing to do with it. And it's when people start realizing that they have the power to change. And we've all done this. Everybody has done something great in their life. And what do? You make up your mind. And you say, I don't care how long it takes time. I don't care how I feel body. I don't care what people think or what's going on in my life environment. I'm going to do this. And the decision becomes an experience that you never forget. And in that moment, you emotionally are giving your body a sampling, a taste of the future. And if you did it every day, your world's going to change. And I've been at this for a long time, and I can tell you that nobody changes until they change their energy. Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. It's the law. And so then you got to be able to stay in that energy for an extended period of time with your eyes open in your day. And when you do, get ready, because you're going to have coincidences and synchronicities and opportunities that are equal to your energy. There's a vibrational match between your energy and that potential in the future, and you're not going anywhere to get it. Like Newtonian physics, dragging your body through space. You're the vortex. Yes. You're drawing it to you. And when you start seeing those events happen, the energy you feel from that experience inspires you to create the next one. And all of a sudden, here we go. People are stepping out of those programs.
Doctor, moving towards the end of the conversation, habits. Can you tell us about your personal habits?
Well, I'm an early morning person.
Have you always been that way?
Yeah, okay. I've always been an early morning person. But my morning time is for me. And that's my time connect to the divine. That's my time to get my brain and body right. That's the time for me to go inward and to make my changes. And it's important for me because the rest of the day I'm serving. So that's an important thing for me. I know the magic goes away when I stop doing that.
Okay.
I'm a physical person with a physical body, so I take care of my body and exercise it. I don't overeat. I just something my grandfather taught me at an early age, and I do my best to do that. I love to learn. I love to create, and probably the only other habit that, besides drinking really good wine, is I love to cook. I mean, I love to cook, and I want to make the supernatural, for me personally, a habit.
Do you have a preference for certain types of foods? Do you avoid certain type of foods?
Food is such a funny thing. It's like talking about religion. I mean, certain people are gluten-free, some people are paleo, some people are vegetarian. I mean, and I've been in the health industry for 31 years, and I've seen it all. Number one, you got to feel good about what you do. Number two is the real issue is not food. When you're living in stress, which is 70% of the time for most people, stress is when your brain and body are out of balance, out of homeostasis. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to order. The stronger the stress hormones, the more the immune system becomes suppressed. That's the way it is. You're mobilizing all this energy for some threat in your outer world. There's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. So long-term building projects get compromised for emergencies. Just like if there's a hurricane coming through Mexico City, you're not going to think about remodeling your kitchen. It's not a time to do it. That's how the body thinks as well. So it compromises. And so when people start craving foods that are going to give them a rush of energy, just like the adrenaline. So, sugars, fast with caffeine, all these things are stimulators. And so what happens with people is then as their immune system becomes suppressed, then the food that they eat is actually now adding to the stress because their immune system is so turned off that the food that they're eating is requiring more energy to break down than the energy they get from the food.
Wow.
So now they're in this downward spiral because they're not only they are emotionally imbalanced, they're chemically imbalanced. When you're chemically imbalanced, you become physically imbalanced. So, I mean, we had a super huge clinic in the United States. We treated thousands and thousands of people for chronic health conditions. And the solution is like a camel in the desert with packs on it. It's going to collapse. So what do? You take off all the packs off the camel. So you go back to low stress foods, right? So you go back to eating foods that are easy for your body to digest. So you have more energy for healing, instead of eating the heavier foods. It's just a simple principle. So for me, I'm intuitive. I don't overeat. I like healthy, raw foods here and there. I like to cook my own food. I eat proteins. I don't eat a lot of food, but I eat well. So if a person says, "Look, this is the diet that works for me," or the person says, I keep eliminating more food out of my diet, sooner or later the person's got to address the fact that they may be controlling, they may be rigid, they may be fear-based. That's the bigger issue than the food, and so my goodness, in 31 years of practice, I can tell you, if you have physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress, 3 stressors, you also have physical balance, chemical balance, and emotional balance. If you get 2 out of those 3 in order, the third one always comes around. If you get someone more physically balanced than more emotionally balanced, they're going to be more chemically balanced. You get someone more chemically balanced, more emotionally balanced, they're going to be more physically balanced. You just work on getting 2 out of those 3 in order, and the person comes around. So I'm not so much stigmatized by certain diets. Other people who are stressed all the time, stress has been famine for thousands of years. People got stressed because there wasn't enough. So the moment a person goes into stress, they take carbohydrates and they store it as fat. Why? That's stored energy.
Yes.
So it's not the taking away the carbohydrates, although that'll help the person but it's also getting them out of the stress response. And so most stressors end up as emotional or psychological stress. So, for me, food is a religion. And then the last thing about it is that, man, if you're going to sit down and eat and don't judge the food you're eating, and be in the right state of mind and right state of body to eat that food. Don't sit down and be anxious and nervous. Take a moment and change your state so your body can receive the food. Some of the basic things that are not only about food, but are about lifestyle as well. And so, last point about that. You could have the most organic, food combining, vegetarian,
wada, yes.
all of that. And if you're living in fear and rigidity, you know that fear is what's signaling the gene.
Yes.
And so now you're going to take all that food and turn it into fear protein. That's organic fear protein.
You're poisoning yourself.
Well, you're just using you're going to take the food, your body's going to break it down into amino acids. The signal from the gene is going to take the amino acids and reform it into a protein. So if the person's in fear, you're just going to take that fear and you're just going to reconstruct it into fear protein. So in our work, we provide great meals for people, and they understand then if they've just signaled the gene and invincibility and empowerment and freedom and a love for life and a joy for existence, and they're feeling that and they're turned on, then the food they eat is going to be nourishing their body into greater states, and that's the way it works.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you tend to avoid TV, movies?
I've never been a big TV person.
Okay.
Here's my theory about TV and media. Don't watch anything you don't want to experience. Period.
Wow, that's so simple and so powerful at the same time.
If you want to watch violence, then get ready. Get ready if that's your thing. And people are so conditioned. You'll say, hey, is there violence in that movie? And then you say, no. And then you say, well, what do you think the body count is? 30, 50. They start thinking about the movie like, well, there's a lot of people getting shot. Like, people getting shot in movies is just normal.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, or getting punched. I mean, so that's insane. So don't watch anything you don't want to experience. And my last point about that is I have a real hard time with television commercials. Really hard time, because people, when they're looking into a television, they're an alpha. They're suggestible, and they're telling your immune system degenerates as you age. You need a flu shot. Try this drug for depression, but you may get suicidal tendencies, homicidal tendencies, projectile vomiting, sudden death, esophageal varices, impotence, hallucinations. But ask your doctor if it's right for you. What world do we live in?
Yes.
That where you can nod your head and just accept that as normal. So the threshold of normal is changing dramatically, and the beauty behind it is that there's a division. Certain people are hypnotized and they're asleep to that, and other people just go, this is trash. I would never look into a television screen like that and stare blindly at it and not have a comment. I'm not going to accept, believe, and surrender to that information without analyzing, and I'm going to say, I don't need a flu shot.
Yeah.
My immune system doesn't age as I get older. I disagree. And so people are waking up to it. So television is just programming. That's why it's called programming. And it depends on what station you watch. What do you want to believe in the news on this side or that side? Where's the truth these days? So I just stay away from it as much as I can.
Beautiful. Favorite wines?
Favorite
wines?
Ooh. Well, I love Camus. Camus is a great wine.
Fantastic wine.
I love Purple Angel from Argentina and Chile.
Okay.
I love, wow, I could go on for French wines for days. I like all kinds of wines. I drink. But wine for me, I love wine with people. It makes it better. I love wine with certain foods. In fact, when I cook, I pick the wine before I decide on the meal. And I cook around the wine these days. And so, in fact, in Santa Barbara, they had fires and mudslides, and my children would call me up saying, they're evacuating right up behind your house here. You're going to be evacuated next. What do you want us to take out of your house? I said, get my wines out of there. I could care less about anything else. Just take my wines.
Awesome. Doctor, as a final message, I know that you're going to be in May in Mexico for Exposer. Do you want to like share something that you're going to mention there?
Sure. I'm going to do the opening keynote on Friday evening.
Okay.
And set the stage for the weekend, and talk about some of my research, and talk about all of this information, this philosophical, theoretical information, is for us to initiate, to apply, to personalize, to demonstrate. And we do that properly, I think we have new experiences. And those new experiences enrich the circuits in the brain, and those experiences create more profound emotions. And now we're teaching our body chemically to understand what our mind is intellectually understood. And if you keep reproducing an experience over and over again, you will neurochemically condition your mind and body into a new state of being, and you'll begin to master that philosophy. So the talk I'll do, really, that I want to do, is going from philosopher to initiate to master, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, and from thinking to doing to being, or learning it with your head, applying it with your hands, and knowing it by heart. And I want to set the stage so that people are enthusiastic about all the speakers and all the content. So
That's awesome.
I'll contribute.
Doctor, it's been an honor. This is a dream come true. I want to thank our mutual friend for making this possible. I'm just extremely thankful.
Well, thankfulness is a good state to live your life in, because you'll be receiving.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
How did you like this interview? I would love it if you leave a comment and we can get into a conversation. And keep checking back here, because I want to support and accompany you in your evolution to the path of wholeness and happiness in this very special time. I want you to step into your brilliance and keep shining. Have a good time. See you tomorrow. Bye.